Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Voiles. I'm communications lead for the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday. During this webinar, you're going to hear more about the Election Official Legal Defense Network from the project's leadership, the staff, and two Georgia election officials who serve as advisory board members of the network. Today, you're going to hear from David Becker, who's Executive Director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, Angie Pitha, who is Project Lead of the network, Ben Ginsberg, who is Co-Chair of the network, Joseph Kirk, who's Election Supervisor for Bartow County, Georgia, and Gabriel Sterling, who is Chief Operating Officer in the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State. After you'll hear from our speakers, you will be able to ask questions. Please feel free to put your question at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You don't have to wait until the Q&A to enter your question. Thanks again for joining us, and now you'll hear from David Becker.
Thanks, Liz, and welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm David Becker. I'm Executive Director of the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research, which I founded in 2016. We work with election officials all over the country of both parties to support elections that voters should trust and do trust. And that, of course, that latter part has become a little more challenging in the last few years. One of our most important projects is the Election Official Legal Defense Network, which we're going to tell you about today. Just to start out, thank you all for not only joining us, but for the work you do every day. I've been working in this space for a long time, about 25 years. I'm a former Justice Department attorney working in the voting section. I was in charge of Georgia during that time. I led the Pew elections team for quite some time and helped lead the effort to create the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, as you might know it. And I've been working at CEIR since then. And one of the things that I know I don't need to tell any of you is that while maybe 10 years ago, this used to be kind of a very busy but somewhat quiet job that many people didn't fully understand and probably wasn't all that interesting to people when you tried to describe it to them, even though it was so crucial. It has become a very complicated, at times very challenging job. And the work you all do to support democracy, to give your communities a voice in how they're governed is just very important to all of us. And the fact that it's become more challenging because you've likely experienced to some degree doubt, harassment, perhaps even threats, is the reason we created the Election Official Legal Defense Network, to tell you all that there are people who support you, there are people who are grateful for your work, and we have your backs. The Election Official Legal Defense Network really came about because in 2021, I was hearing stories from election officials that made my hair stand on end, things that they were having to deal with that they had never had to deal with before, things that actually in some cases threatened their personal safety and the safety of their families and their staffs. And then I had a conversation with two people I admire a great deal who had an idea. Ben Ginsberg, former counsel to the George W. Bush and Mitt Romney campaigns, and Bob Bauer, former counsel to the Obama campaign, and in some ways still counsel to the Biden campaign, who had worked across the aisle on issues related to election administration for quite some time. They'd co-chaired the Presidential Commission on Election Administration in the aftermath of the 2012 election. And they had the idea of the Election Official Legal Defense Network. It's really their brainchild, and we were very proud to make it a reality. We're going to go into details of exactly how it works so that you know how to access these services if you ever find that you need them. And we hope that you won't, but if you ever do, we're here for you. First, I want to make a little note about Georgia specifically. I think you all know Georgia has passed a ban on third-party funding of elections. We want to stress this should not stop you from making a request for help if you need it from a lawyer who might be able to assist you. If you need to speak to a lawyer, if you think you need to speak to a lawyer, submit a request through EOLDN. You can discuss your situation with a lawyer. All of the services will be provided in accordance with Georgia law, no matter what. But don't kind of self-select out of this. Make sure that if you need help, you ask for help, because we're here for that purpose. With that, I want to hand it over to Ben Ginsberg, who is here, serves actively as co-chair of EOLDN, and has been an incredible leader in this field for quite some time, to tell you a little more about this. So Ben, over to you.
David, thank you very much. It's great to be here with all of you, and thank you for everything that all of you do to make our country so much better. I say this on behalf of Bob Bauer and myself as the co-chairs. This is a rare opportunity for me to put words in Bob's mouth, and I think he'll agree with each and every one of them. David mentioned the Presidential Commission, which is where Bob and I originally came together to do bipartisan work. And that experience as being co-chairs of the commission really was so eye-opening for us. We learned so much about what all of you do and how critical all of your work is to our country and the democracy. Because of that, I want to put special emphasis on what David just said about being sure to take advantage of our services. We've screened them with Georgia law. You're talking to EOLDN about any situations in which you might benefit from the advice is within Georgia law. If there is an irrational challenge to that by someone, we would be pleased to have EOLDN aid in that. Everyone has a right to a lawyer, and that's what we're about and want to be sure that you have. As David mentioned, EOLDN was born in the wake of the 2020 elections, as election officials came in the fire for just doing your very crucial jobs. As we learned of election officials needing help beyond what might be provided by your government attorneys, Bob and I realized how we could help, and with David's assistance, we did set up EOLDN. And with the great work of David and Angie and their team, we spent the last 2 years recruiting lawyers to provide election officials with pro bono representation in times of need. We've managed to expand that to nearly 24 nationwide and regional law firms. Hundreds of lawyers have signed on to the network. Legal nonprofit organizations and hundreds of individual attorneys throughout the country are not only ready to support you and your fellow election officials if you need it, but they've also proven to be tremendously effective recruiters of their fellow lawyers to join EOLDN. Bob and I are so proud to co-chair this project. And honestly, we wish there wasn't a need for EOLDN, but there is. So if there's one message that Bob, David, and I want to reemphasize, and David said this, and we hope you'll spread this to your colleagues, we want you to know that we have your backs and we're standing ready to help. So thank you for everything you do. And now let me turn it back to David.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, that's exactly right. We're actually feel very privileged to talk to you all like this today, because I think it's important to let you know, especially during this busy election year, when you're overwhelmed with work, when you're when you might be feeling stresses, some of those stresses might be amplified, that there are every day all of us deeply appreciate your work and hope you'll never need our services. But if you do, we're there. With that, I won't really introduce Gabe Sterling, because Gabe does not need an introduction. And you all know Gabe well, but I think you all know firsthand also how instrumental Gabe was, along with all of the staff in the Secretary of State's office and all of your staffs in the counties, to ensuring stability in a really unstable period of time in the aftermath of the 2020 election, and how important that work was, not just in Georgia, but nationwide, and how much people appreciate that. I really appreciate you being on this webinar as well, Gabe, and for serving as a member of the advisory board and for all the work you and your team at the Secretary of State's office do. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Gabe to talk a little bit about what he's seeing nationally and in Georgia.
Thanks, David. Sorry, I was muted for a second there. Technology is always our friend, and I'm glad to see that David got a haircut for our event today. So, because I need to get one of those too. As David said, all of us in Georgia, our office, your offices, we were shoved into the center of the whirlwind in 2020. And because of that situation, I'm going to call it the great opportunity to travel the nation and talk to elections officials just like you, who are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with, the insanity, the threats, and really the legal side of this. I mean, we know you have your county attorneys, as Ben pointed out, and we know that you can lean on the Secretary of State's office for some of like this, the things that are happening that are sort of functional. But there are things that go beyond what we can do. And EOLDN is there to, you're going to hear a theme about this, have your back. Because one of the things that when I've traveled the country and I've told local elections officials is other people have their back. Is one of the things that's happening, we're seeing this as a tactic, is that there are those who are trying to separate you from your support network. And this is consistent. This is the overproduction of open records requests. This is the phone calls. This is the come in and show me everything you've ever done. I'm sure ORRs and cast vote records are things that drive all of y'all crazy. I mean, but they're here at the next step. So what I want you to do is when you have a question in your head that goes kind of beyond the normal, this is my normal administration thing, don't hesitate to call. It may not be something for them, but they can help send you the resources that can, but it may be something that they can help you with. You shouldn't have the stress and the thought process and the hurt and the emotional stress of all this without people there to unburden you. And this is true across the country. I don't care if you're in Louisiana, Utah, Illinois, you can be in a 70% Trump county, you can be a 70% Biden county. There are people that are kind of going to come after you. I was talking to an official in Shasta County, California. Some of y'all may have heard about this. Their board made them move to hand-marked hand count. And it's been a nightmare for them. And they've got people who are their county commissioners who are forcing them to do some of these things. It's been difficult. And I asked them, well, how are the crazies? And when I say the crazies, you know who I mean. They've got 100 on the right and they got 50 on the left, and they're the same ones they've been dealing with for 10 years. And then they got all new ones too. EOLDN is there to help provide you resources you need. And what I really want to ask a favor of all of y'all is, because there's, I think, probably about 100 people on the call. For those of you who are on the call, I know you're in your regions. I want you to talk about this with your other counties and let them know that there's this resource available to them. That's the important part. I mean, I know some of y'all are on the South Carolina, Alabama borders, and you're talking to people over there in Florida and Tennessee and North Carolina. Talk to them. And as a favor to me also, build up your own support network. I mean, I know I go to church sometimes and I got some election deniers that still kind of catch me in the corner sometimes. I got to walk them through stuff. I know that's y'all's lives too. This is something that's very important. You need to have this legal backstop. You should never feel under threat. You should never feel like somebody's going to sue you in a personal capacity for just doing your job and following the law and telling the truth. So I'm asking you to please share the news about EOLDN, to let people know this resource. Get them signed up newsletters so they can see what's happening and get those reminders. And if you have a friend or somebody in your office or anybody else feels like they need an attorney to help deal with the situation they're dealing with, yes, you have your local resources and you have our office. But if it's something that feels outside of that, do not hesitate to call EOLDN. That is what they are there for. We're the center of the universe again, guys. I know it sucks. It's just reality. We are one of those states. So let's be prepared for everything. And I'm thankful to Ben and Bob and David and their whole team for putting all this together. And I want you to use them as a resource where you can. And Joseph's going to talk more about some local stuff, but please spread the news about this available resource because we know we need them. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to my friend David.
Oh, thank you, Gabe. Gabe raised a really good point. I just want to reiterate the efforts by people who refuse to accept or actively spread lies about past elections, usually people who supported losing candidates in those elections, have the effect of trying to isolate you. And I fear that that's actually the intent, that overwhelming you with duplicative and frivolous open records requests, finding you when you're out in public in your communities, at church, at your place of worship, at the grocery store, at your children's schools. I mean, these are stories we hear all the time. And what I found is there are some election officials who are responding that by allowing themselves to be isolated for fear that they might be identified as having worked with other counties or other election officials in other states, or God forbid, worked with someone who might be of a different party than they are, to come up with best practices. That used to be the way things just worked all the time. Most of this work wasn't very political. It was just best practices that came about. A great example of that is the Presidential Commission on Election Administration that Ben and Bob co-chaired. But it's understand that if you allow yourself to be isolated, you're almost allowing them to succeed. That's what they want. They want you to be isolated so that you don't have a support network and they can apply more stress to you. And this is hopefully one of many ways that we can provide an antidote to that. So with that, I want to get into the details about how the Election Official Legal Defense Network actually works. And for that, I'm going to hand it off to Angie Pitha, who leads the Election Official Legal Defense Network for us. You should know she's been working with the legal community and nonprofit partners and election officials for some time. She is an attorney. She is also has experience in the elections world as she's worked actually in Denver, Colorado, with the elections division, working elections for them there. So she understands this work firsthand as she's been a part of it. So Angie, I'll hand it over to you to get into how this actually all works.
Thank you so much, David, and everyone else. Gabe, Bob, sorry, Ben, pardon me. Bob is here in spirit. I wanted to say it's so good to be here with all of you in Georgia. I have a bit of personal connection and personal pleasure in being able to spend time with you today because a couple of reasons. Number one, I got my undergraduate degree from Emory University. So I lived in Atlanta for 4 years and I had a great time. And a secondary point is that I am just about the biggest Atlanta Braves fan you'll ever meet. And that started when I went to college there. And I've been a fan through thick and thin. And certainly the thickest time was when the Braves clinched the World Series in 2021. And some of you may recall that was an election day in the United States. It was November 2nd, 2021. And instead of me calling in sick for election day and staying home and rooting for the Braves and hoping that they clinch on that day, I went and worked the election. And that should show you my commitment to election administration. I made that choice. Now, my supervisors did allow me to take breaks and go check the score on a TV that we had in the building on my break. But other than that, I was working the election and I was in the trenches just like all of you are. So I want to thank Gabe and Joseph for joining us today to talk about how EOLDN can help election officials under attack. They both serve on our advisory board because they believe that this project is extremely valuable for election officials all over the country. Referring to Gabe's ask that you share this information with others in your field, I have a data point for you. EOLDN has been receiving requests from election officials for 2.5 years now. Actually, over 2.5 years. The EOLDN request form asks how election officials heard about EOLDN. And we look at those responses, and over half of the responses say that they heard about us from another election official. We are very happy about that statistic. And we are very grateful to directly present to you in our hope and our ask, Gabe's ask as well, and I'm sure it'll be Joseph's too, that you share this information with your colleagues in Georgia and in other states, because with your awareness, knowledge, and willingness to vouch for us, however small, just by sharing the information, that is what moves the needle on people who are thinking about asking for help. They get more, they feel safer, and they know that there's credibility around this project. And there certainly is a lot of credibility. And what gives us the credibility is all of you. So that is an ask that I'm just tacking on to Gabe's ask as well. I am now going to dive into how EOLDN works. And I'm going to tell you how you and your colleagues could ask for our legal services if you ever need them. Ben mentioned that EOLDN has recruited volunteers and law firms in Georgia and across the country. It's true. We're very happy that there's been such a large amount of interest from lawyers in Georgia. They are very aware of all of these different types of challenges, and how pervasive they are and how serious they are. And they are ready to listen to your story and provide confidential support for you. Let me talk a little bit about eligibility for the service. EOLDN services are available to current and former election officials and poll workers, regardless of whether the official is paid or unpaid, full-time or seasonal, like me, and certainly regardless of political affiliation. As a public charity, CEIR, which is the organization that runs EOLDN, may not participate or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to candidates for public office. If you or any of your election official colleagues have received threats, have been harassed, are facing efforts to undermine your official duties, are facing possible civil or criminal investigations, or need a lawyer to talk to, describe your situation and see what your options might be, you can ask us for help. It is very easy. You would go to EOLDN.org. There's a large button in the upper right-hand corner that says Request Help. From there, you can submit your request. We will follow up with you right away. And from there, we'll assess what help might benefit you. We'll look for an attorney in our network that fits the criteria of your problem and start reaching out for help. When you visit EOLDN.org, I also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The newsletter just went out yesterday, so we'll have another one in May and beyond that. That newsletter does provide EOLDN updates, ways to contact us, and just updates on the work of CEIR in the election space, opportunities to engage with us at events, webinars, and the like. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We are deeply honored to be able to offer this legal service to you. And now David will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Angie. Last but not least, I want to introduce you all to Joe Kirk, who you already know well. I've gotten to know Joe over many years now. He's one of the most diligent, effective election officials in the nation, not just in Georgia. And I'm incredibly grateful for his support of this
Great
work.
to be a techie is all I can say.
Hey, Ben, you're on. You should go on mute. There you go. With that, I just want to hand it over to Joe to talk a little bit more about what he's seeing from the perspective of most of you at the county level.
Thank you very much, David. And I appreciate your kind introduction. Maybe too kind, but and this may be a little repetitive, but some of the stuff should be said more than once. We've seen a change in the landscape here in Georgia for the last 4-6 years, and that includes, especially this year, I've seen increased activity from folks I call concerned citizens on the local level here in Georgia. Stories we've heard from other states are now coming here. These quote unquote training sessions include like how to harass local election officials through open records requests, through what's been called lawfare, where they're using legal processes to bog us down. It includes instructions for how to pressure other officials in your jurisdiction to influence your decisions, like your county commissioners or your sheriff. It includes statements like, you know, if your First Amendment doesn't work, use your Second Amendment, which is terrifying when you hear it in a crowd. We are seeing efforts to take over local parties and stack local election boards to influence policy decisions and certification decisions. And we're seeing changes in law that are being pushed from citizens who don't understand how the process works and are really undermining the work that or potentially undermining the work that we do. We're also seeing counties fighting misinformation and voter challenges that are based on faulty data. That's just bogging them down, and uneducated activists. All this stuff is designed to make you feel alone and isolated and backed in the corner where you have no choice and no options. But you always have a choice, you always have options, and you are not alone. And before I go on, I also wanted to mention, you know, everything is not always doom and gloom. We're also seeing new officials come into the field who are taking on leadership roles for the best of reasons, and they are just running with it, and it's so exciting to see. We're seeing citizens step into poll workers because they can see we need help, and we're seeing outside groups more and more step up to defend us, which is what EOLDN does. And they're a great example of folks who are there to help when we're at our most vulnerable and really need it. So they have their staff, their volunteers are there to support our elections, our profession, and most importantly, us as individuals. Even outside of, say, our county role as elected officials, if we're cut off from the county, we still have resources through EOLDN. You know, you should reach out to us if you're receiving threats. You know, there's multiple people we can reach out to in those cases. This is just one of them. Reach out to all of them. Don't leave any stone unturned. If you feel like you're being forced to do something that isn't legal, or you're getting bad legal advice and you just need a sanity check, you can reach out. Or if you're just worried or scared about something that's happening in your jurisdiction and need some advice and need someone to talk to that's sort of got that bird's eye view and you can trust to give an unbiased opinion, that's what these folks do, and they're good at it. You know, and Gabe mentioned having local resources for your office, your county attorney, the state offices, things like that. This is a resource available to you as a person. So let's say you're removed from your position through one of our state laws, you're cut off from that county attorney, you can turn to us for help, and you should. So just to say it again, because I think it's important, you're not alone. None of us are. This is a community. We're here to help each other, support each other. It's one of the things I love about working in elections. So please be sure to reach out if you need it. And as Gabe mentioned, be sure other people in this community know this exists and it's available to them. The regional meetings are a great chance to talk about this. But, you know, sometimes when you're having a really bad day and everything's falling down around you, you forget what resources are available. But you're going to call a friend to vent, so you don't just to get it out off your chest. When that happens, because that's going to happen, remind your friend when they call you that this is available, and encourage them to reach out. You know, especially if they're worried that talking to somebody is going to make things worse, because that's one of the hallmarks of these, frankly, abusive relationships. Sometimes is that they try to convince you not to talk about it, but you should, and this is a great place to talk about it. So this is going to be a great year. I'm excited about it. I think we're going to do great. It's going to be challenging, but we're going to rise to that challenge. And anyone on this call, if you need me, you know how to get in touch with me. You can reach out whenever you need to. And please, if you need legal assistance, reach out to EOLDN. And David, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Joe. Actually, Joe just raised a really good point. So these conversations can often be a little bit down because you know, we know, because I talk to so many election officials, the stresses that you're all feeling, and that's all true. But I also want to say one other thing to follow up on Joe's point. we sometimes forget to think about the achievements. Somehow, for those of you that have been working since at least 2020, you managed a new voting system. You managed the highest turnout in Georgia history, all in the middle of a global pandemic. And then, after your work was unfairly attacked with lies, your work withstood more scrutiny than any election, not in American history, in world history. More courts reviewing them. Judges in Georgia who were appointed by the losing presidential candidate reviewed them. All across the country, your colleagues experienced the same thing. You in Georgia also had to deal with the Senate runoffs. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. And I some of you have heard me talk before, might remember me saying this, but what you all accomplished in 2020 and afterwards was one of the greatest achievements of the American democratic process, not because of the outcome, but because of the participation and how much it's withstood scrutiny over that time. And we should have thrown election officials in Georgia and elsewhere a parade. And instead, we know you've been attacked and harassed pretty much constantly since 2020, not because you did a bad job, but because your job was done so well. So never forget that that is an achievement that you all accomplished. And despite the ongoing harassment, 2022 was still a success. The Senate runoffs were still a success. Everything has worked. And it's really truly remarkable. And I think, Gabe, I think you had another point you wanted to make. You're on mute again.
I want to let you keep talking for a while because I'm hoping this is making everybody feel better because it's true. I mean, I remember at the end of 2020, we were basically in victory lap mode because we had no lines. We were getting the results quick. I know it didn't feel quick sometimes because the margin was so close. But the elections officials in this state did an amazing job. The elections officials across the country did an amazing job. And one of the things that I've even changed my own talking points on is when people say, oh, we did a great here, but I don't know about those states. We do know about those states because they're just like y'all. And one of the things I think that Joseph referred to and Angie did, you have your county attorney, a really good signal. If you go to your county attorney and say, that's not really what I can do for you, that is a giant red flag to call EOLDN. That should be a very important tipping point. If you know, and even if you think you might want to, if the thought clicks in your head, call EOLDN. They're there for that. And like I said, they can steer you in the right direction at a minimum or give you the resources you need. And to Joseph's biggest point, this isn't about your role as an elections director or a board member or an employee. This is about you as a person. They're there to defend you in your individual role and help you get to where you need to defend you, your family, your psyche, all that stuff. It's really important that we use the resources available to us. The reason we were so successful in 2020 and so successful in 2022, and we're going to be successful in 2024, is y'all are great at using the resources you have. Be they plentiful, be they small, you figure it out. But you can lean on other people to figure other stuff out sometimes. Don't stack it all on yourself because none of us need that stress. You know, and that's the reason that I'm proud to be an advisor to this group. I go around the country and talk about this group. I go around the country to talk to elections officials just like y'all, and they're all feeling the same thing. But that county attorney question is, if they're like, I don't know if I can help you with that, huge red flag, time to call EOLDN. So I just want to make sure we have that clear. That's a very good tipping point for y'all.
Yeah. And Gabe, I mean, Gabe and I have talked about this before. You know, I also think back to 2020 when you all in Georgia's 159 counties, somehow after 2 decades of not having paper ballots, managed a recount of 5 million paper ballots in, Gabe, do I have this right, about 5 days? Statewide?
It was exactly 5 days. Somebody had to send me a bottle of whiskey because they lost a bet, didn't they, David?
Someone on this call had to send someone a bottle of whiskey that I was hoping and I knew I would send to you, but it was a nice additional incentive. But that's the reason I get asked all the time, what am I worried about? As I talk to the media about the 2024 election. And I always start by saying, I'll tell you what I'm not worried about. I'm not worried about whether the 2024 election will actually be run well. I am not worried about whether the professional election officials all over the country are going to manage a convenient, safe, secure process for all of the voters that want to vote and accurately report the results. I have every confidence in that. My worries are more about what might happen afterwards and lies that might be spread and efforts to destabilize, which is why we have EOLDN, quite frankly. But I'm hopeful that the transparent professional work that you all do ultimately convinces whoever loses that they lost and their supporters that they lost. It's one of the unwritten kind of sayings in our community that you probably have all heard before. Ultimately, the goal of a well-run election is to convince the loser and the loser's supporters that they lost. And you have done that incredibly well, despite the fact that some refuse to accept reality. So with that, Liz, I think we hand it off to you to help manage us through any questions you might have. And if you all have any, just go into the Q&A function on the Zoom, type it in, and we'll get around to you.
Yeah, so just type in your question, I'll read it out loud, and the panelists will answer. We received a few questions from the registration page, so I'll start on those, but feel free to add in the Q&A box, everyone. So this first question is probably for David and Gabriel. How and to whom do we report credible threats?
Gabe, you might have some thoughts on this too. I'll say, first of all, if you have a threat that is urgent, a threat to your person, I would submit that first and foremost to the Department of Justice Election Threats Task Force or to local law enforcement. And if it's really urgent, local law enforcement might be the way to go. Your safety is most important. I mean, that is, and you should use and report them to multiple places if you feel like your safety is at issue. We work very fast at the EOLDN. We usually get back to you. I think in every case, we get back to you within 1 business day. We usually can find an attorney and match an attorney to you to have initial discussions within 2 to 3 business days. Angie, I think we've had really good record on that. And so we'll work quickly, but when it comes to your personal safety, take care of yourself and go to law enforcement. And the Department of Justice, I think you all know, has an election threats task force, which will also investigate threats that probably aren't of an immediate urgent nature, but are nonetheless concerning. Gabe, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Absolutely, the local law enforcement side, for your local sheriff, local police, really let Blake and me know. Go through your liaison if you have to. But generally speaking, if it's a cyber threat, voicemail, anything like that, there's a GBI cyber threat that we can go through. And even now, since I have the advantage of having been swatted in January, I now know that if we go to a Homeland, we can actually, if we do it fast enough, usually track that number, even if it's a spoof. So in those situations, we need to get to GBI and FBI as fast as we can, and we have a direct line to them. So go to your local law enforcement. They will put up the line, go to us so we can be aware of it. And that's the biggest thing, because to David's point, your personal safety is the single most important thing through this. And we want to make sure that you have the resources you need and that the police are aware. I mean, I know sometimes in 2020, they were slow to react just because this was a new environment and they didn't get it. I think now they genuinely get it. At Justice, GBI and FBI and Homeland, they're really putting resources towards protecting y'all.
If I could add one thing to that, because this has been an issue I've had a couple of times in my tenure in Bartow. We talk a lot about, who to notify and all that. But if you have a imminent threat to your safety, call 911. Don't reach out to the sheriff directly. Call dispatch first. They're trained, they know what to do. They will send you help immediately. If it's cybersecurity, if it's something else, then absolutely, and notify everybody. But if you're in danger, please call 911, get the help you need as soon as you can possibly get it.
And by the way, again, back to our theme of we want to be realists, but we don't want to be depressing here. I think we all know the actual number of imminent dangerous threats to election officials, fortunately, have been relatively low. There have been more ominous threats that aren't exactly imminent, that are disgusting. And Georgia has seen its share of them. There have been threatening messages. There has been ongoing harassment. There have been threats to people's mental health and general well-being. But fortunately, there haven't been too many cases, and I don't anticipate many of you will have to experience an imminent threat of the type where you have to worry about calling 911 or immediately. That being said, you know, we have heard about, in rare instances, election officials being followed home by strange cars and things like that. And there are, you know, obviously be careful about it. One strategy I've heard from law enforcement and others is, if you think you're being followed, don't drive to your home, but instead, you know, stop ideally at a police station or a sheriff's office, law enforcement of some type. And that will usually chase them off. But you know, be just first and foremost, take care of yourselves.
And if you're in Georgia, you can always drive to a Waffle House. It's very well lit, and the police are usually there.
Good
I recall
advice.
that vividly, yes.
I've never
Okay.
lived in Georgia, and I know that's true.
Our next question from the registration page. Again, you can type a question into the Q&A and we can answer it live at any time, but this one's from the registration page. Could this information be included in a future poll worker training in Georgia? These folks are who are on the front lines.
I mean, the answer is, I mean, if a county wants to incorporate some of this into their poll worker trainings, I think, Angie, we can provide them with some resources for that. And certainly at the state level, Gabe, we've done, you know, if you'd like us to, if Gavrio or the Secretary of State's office would like us to elaborate on some of this, we're always happy to do that.
I think the safest bet would probably be to get with Joseph and disseminate extra information through Gavrio directly as their association, rather than putting the government imprimatur onto a third party. I get what you're saying, and
Nope.
I think that would be the best way to help share this information to the broadest audience possible.
And I'm happy to work with you on that.
That's great.
Yeah, our service is available for poll workers, even people who just work for election day. You know, it doesn't matter how long you work, or if you're full-time, or if you're seasonal. I mentioned that in my remarks, but it's true. It's open to anyone, whether you're paid or unpaid, or if you just work one day, or if you're full-time staff. We do not offer the service to poll watchers. I know that sometimes those words can get interchanged. So the poll workers who actually come in and they report to someone who's running the election, and they take their direction from the actual agency or authority running the election. Those people are all covered, no matter how long you work, or if you're paid or unpaid, or if you're current or former. That's okay too.
Yeah, so anyone who's working for the government election officials, from, you know, this Secretary Raffensperger down to a poll worker who works one day, as long as it relates in some way to your official election duties. And if you wonder whether that's true or not, as we've said many times, no harm in submitting a request, going on to EOLDN.org. Worst case scenario, we'll say this, you know, we can't help you refinance your home loan. But in most cases, we'll be able to say, yes, we'll get to work on finding an attorney to match.
Okay, next question we've got. Will there be any government grants offered to help counties establish more security within election offices?
I guess that one's going to be more directed towards me. And we just recently had the continuing resolution passed for HAVA for this year, but it's a much smaller number than we've historically had. We don't know exactly the number yet, and we have to look at the resources we need to have in several different situations. We, as Joseph knows, and I know all of y'all know, we had a lot of elections bills passed. We don't know what the governor will or will not sign yet. And some of those things will kind of drive the decision-making processes on what can be available for more security grants. We were able to do some back in the 2020-21 timeframe. And I know many of y'all took advantage of that for accessibility and security, where we did a 3-to-1 match. I don't know, we don't have that much money anymore. We don't have the money from the feds. So I doubt it, but we're always looking for ways to keep costs off of y'all. I mean, as an example, I mean, get too deep in the weeds, we're trying to work on getting SB 189 beat back, because obviously that's going to increase the cost for ballots once we get there for 2026. For 2024, it's a little bit different. but we are doing all we can all the time to keep costs off of y'all, so the dollars you do have can be spent on the things that you do need.
Okay, next question. How is this service different from our own designated county council?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this service is designed to fill in gaps. It is wonderful if you have a responsive county council who's dealing with your every needs and they have adequate resources and they can help you in every way. Absolutely go to them first. They're there for a reason. They're probably very familiar with issues you're dealing with. We highly encourage that. This is not to replace that work. But if for any reason you find that there are gaps, that they can't assist you, Gabe alluded to this, that they can't help you in some way, there are rare instances where we have seen county council and or county governing structures, county boards, be either sympathetic or actively engage in some of the harassment that's being that's being directed at you. If those are the cases, this is a way to find a gap. So that if you're experiencing a gap, EOLDN is here to help. Oftentimes, we get asked by lawyers, or when lawyers want to volunteer, they'll say, "Oh, I don't have any election law experience." And almost none of the requests have anything to do with election law, because the county councils actually are really good at that kind of thing. It's often for things that are unrelated to election law, that might relate to personal safety or well-being. It might relate to outside requests or even county board requests for access to voting equipment or other voting materials that they shouldn't have access to under the law, and you think they shouldn't have access to under the law, and you want to make sure you talk to another lawyer before giving someone unauthorized access. These are the kinds of things we see quite a bit. Sometimes it's trying to deal with the issues related to an overwhelming volume of public records requests, things like that. So it's if you're experiencing a gap, don't hesitate, but don't feel like EOLDN is designed to bypass your county council. It is not. We're very grateful for all the county councils out there who are doing wonderful work and supporting their election officials.
And let me be clear, because David said, before giving unauthorized access, just never give unauthorized access. Just don't do that. It's very simple.
But we also know there are pressures that are applied pretty hard sometimes, right? And people might make idle threats, and this is happening not just in Georgia. There's literally a public records request just came across my phone while we were on this call in Pennsylvania, where a county gave unauthorized access to voting machines, and a news organization is trying to get more information about that. So this has happened in multiple states. It's more just a recognition of the pressures that you will be under in some cases, and we're here to fill in the gaps and to back you up however you need it.
We have a few different questions that ask specifically about this election cycle, about 2024, and whether our panel of experts is seeing a different kind of threat in 2024 than we've seen before. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I can speak to it somewhat. Yes. And the unfortunate side of it is more sophisticated. In 2020, it was, let's throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. In 2024, we're seeing smarter people with a very specific agenda, basically attempting to set people up for failure in different ways. In Georgia, we will be back part of that during the legislative session. It's not just in Georgia, to David's point, we're seeing in Pennsylvania, there's a few states that we all know where it's going to be happening: North Carolina, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. Did I say North Carolina already? In Pennsylvania and Michigan. And it is much more sophisticated. It is much smarter, and we need to be prepared for that. Which is another good reason to have EOLDN here, to provide the support for those jurisdictions that may not have the resources, or maybe a new person. And if you're a new elections official, I really want to encourage you to use every resource you have. Reach out to Joseph, reach out to our office. But yes, I think this is a little different. They're all in the same vein. They're trying to achieve outcomes. Our job is to defend the will of the voters no matter what. I had to do a interview the other day, and I basically said, it's just as likely I will be standing in front of those steps in November of 2024 defending a Trump win that I know is legitimate in my state. And I've talked to people on the other side who their heads explode when they hear that. But what we're seeing is generally from one side getting prepared to try to gum up the works. To David's and Joseph's and hell, everybody's points. We're seeing these ORRs. We're seeing these ways to cleave people away. We're seeing these ways to separate people. We're seeing these ways to stress you to the max. And part of it is tactical. It is to get you so stressed out that you make a mistake and then they exploit the mistake. Humans are going to make mistakes. We have to be able to deal with grace and do those kind of things, but there are people prepared to exploit it, and that is the intention of a lot of these kind of things we're seeing. I don't mean to go too far afield on this, David. I think you want to step in on it, but that's the reality of what we're seeing on the ground across the country and in Georgia.
Yeah, I completely agree. I will say, and I expect you will all be nodding your heads, though we can't see you. You see these groups of activists who have been organized in so many of your counties, and this is across the country. And to Gabe's point, it's not just in the battleground states. It's happening in California. It's happening in Texas. It's happening in Utah. I mean, it's happening in places where we know who's going to win the presidential election in those states. And I am concerned, and I think you're all preparing for the probability that depending upon who wins, there may be efforts to slow down and perhaps even obstruct completely the counting, auditing, recounting, and certification process at the county level, not just at the state level, and then possibly to obstruct and delay the ascertainment of electors at the state level on December 11th and the meeting of the electors on December 17th. So I suspect you're all preparing for that. And you are very well served by your community of election officials throughout the state and your Secretary of State's office for that. I expect you will be exceptionally well prepared, whatever you get thrown at you. Ben, did you have something you wanted to add in there too?
David, I think all of that is absolutely right. In looking at what those groups you described are doing, I think you all need to be prepared for things that go on in the polling place on election day to actually slow down and obstruct the voting process, which really argues for something I'm sure you're all doing, which is working on protocols with law enforcement and game playing a bit. What happens if you have sort of over-aggressive, over-caffeinated activity in your polling places?
Joe, anything from you? Or
yeah, just one thing to build on what Gabe was saying. Yes, these efforts are more sophisticated than they were in 2020 and much better organized than we've seen in the past. But their talking points aren't new. It's the same things recycled. They found the ones that work. They found better ways to say them, but we know what they're going to say. We know what they're going to accuse us of. And the difference in my mind between this year and 2020 is this year we can see it coming. So be proactive, have your messaging ready, try to get ahead of it as best you can. And then as it starts to get bigger, be ready to reach out to resources like this one to help. And we'll get through this year and we'll be better than ever.
Yeah, to that point, that's a really good point. The people who are trying to attack democracy are better organized, but the people who are defending democracy are also better organized. And one thing I know about all of you and the people who are on this call and so many of our colleagues around the country is we're standing up, as Gabe said, for the process. Whatever that process delivers, the will of the people, that should govern. In 2016, I said in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 election, Trump won legitimately because he did. There was still no evidence that there was any issue with that election that would have indicated that he didn't win a majority of votes in states that comprise the majority of the Electoral College, which are the rules that we have. In 2020, Biden won legitimately, and regardless of who wins in 2024 legitimately by the process we've established before the election, I know all of us will be standing up for the legitimacy of that process.
And David, one other aspect that I think people are doing much better this time is getting support of community leaders. Many of you in 2020 especially were kind of standing alone without leadership from people, support from leadership in your communities, outreach programs to the leaders of the community in all walks, from faith to vets to business to labor, I think pays off in those particular moments when you need it.
Yeah, I also want to stress, I mean, I don't know how many of you in Georgia, probably some of you were prescient enough to predict a fairly narrow victory for one or the other candidates in 2020, but it also that was fairly new in Georgia. And so it was probably difficult to be prepared for the level of attacks and scrutiny that came. I suspect that for all of us, we're now prepared for everything. I mean, we're prepared for a narrow election. We're prepared for either outcome. We're prepared for a variety of attacks, and that puts us in a much better position.
In fairness, prior to the 2020 election, the first time that many of y'all on this call ever saw or heard David Becker, Secretary Raffensperger, Jordan Fuchs, and I brought him in essentially to scare the living hell out of you, because we had a feeling it was going to be close, and to tell you that you're going to be under a lot of scrutiny. And we weren't prescient, we were just cautious, and that caution paid off. So I want to thank David for coming down and doing that work long before I knew who he was, to really kind of lay out the situation we were in. And we're in a similar situation now, and we really can. There's no dispute. There's no question. We are going to be the center of the political universe again, and we have to be prepared for whatever's going to come. And we can see all these things, like Joseph said. This is a lot of the same stuff we've seen. It's more sophisticated. It's got a nicer sheen to it. It's the same load of crap. We just need to be prepared to deal with the crap and shovel it out of the way and just do our jobs.
Yep, and there's not.
Okay,
I mean, there's no one better. I mean, you guys have already been through the trial by fire. Like, this is, again, I just want to end. In the community of, I was at a dinner last night with members of the media, and one of them, someone from the Wall Street Journal, came up to me and was asking about certain states and how ready they were. And she asked about Georgia. And I said, I'm not worried about Georgia. And she said, oh, really? And I said, if every state ran elections as well as Georgia does, we would be in pretty darn good shape. Now, there's a few other states I'd say that about too, all in the top group. But you guys have withstood this scrutiny. And it's going to come again. And you're ready for it.
And Liz, with that, can we just stop and let
Yes.
more about other states?
We can stop, but we need David to close us out. He's going to show the toolkit where you can all share this information with your colleagues.
So back to the point that Gabe was saying about sharing with colleagues, whether they're in your state or not, these are ways to do it. Spread those, just mention this when you're talking to other people in your networks. There's a toolkit that we're going to share with you that you can print and hang posters. You can share on social media. And this is the QR code. And if you leave it up for a minute or two, so you can get your phones out, scan it, and get that digital toolkit. If you miss it, just let us know, and we'll send you a link. Right, Liz and Angie? Yeah. So you can go to help@EOLDN.org.
Make sure to scan the QR code before the legislature outlaws QR codes in our state.
Oh no.
That'll be another webinar we will host at a later date. Thank you all very much for being on, and thanks most importantly for all of the work that you do every day. It's going to be a tough season. There's no way around it, but know that every time every minute of your work, you're giving voice to your communities and how they're going to be governed, and people appreciate that, even when they don't agree with the outcome.
Real quick, could somebody drop that link into the chat for people who are on their phones and can't do this?
That's the general site. I think there's we'll send it out to the registrants. We'll send the link out by email.
All right, great.
Thank you for telling us that, Tanya. I appreciate your question.
Thank you all. We'll hopefully see you all soon in person, and thank you again for your all of your continued work. And thanks especially to Ben and Joe and Gabe for being on the webinar as well, and all the good work you guys are doing.
Well, thank y'all for helping out our folks.
Absolutely. I can tell you how much I appreciate this. Thank you for our hard work.